Thank you, Mr. President. I had a question for Chief Medina. Chief Medina not here? Okay, the question that I have is in reference to a story that was done in reference to overtime that happened recently. And his quote was up here on the 5th floor, the police department, the executive staff, we're so busy to go through the final details of looking through somebody's timesheets. It is not something that we're going to be carving out time for. And that question I'm going to use as an example. When I was a young police officer, my first sergeant, Buddy Whitson, told me that your timesheet is the single most important item that you deal with as a police officer every single day of the week and twice a week. That needs to be accurate, 100%. It's a legal document, so it has to be 100% accurate. And for the comment of that we don't have time for that, that puts me in a position where you don't have time to do your job. So I needed to get an explanation as why we don't have time to do a timesheet and check timesheets from the administration.
Council President Benson, Councilor Sanchez, we weren't notified of your question in advance, so the chief isn't here, but Lieutenant Roger Legendre is here and can answer those questions.
President and members of council, with this question for Chief Medina, this is something that we'd like to get back to you on and have him give an opportunity to have a proper response to you.
Okay, and what's your name, sir?
I apologize. My name's Roger Legendre, and I'm interim commander with Operations Review Division.
Lieutenant Legendre, I just wanted to ask you a question as well. Is the timesheet not the single most important item that you fill out every single 2 weeks for your paycheck, and it's a legal document and has to be filled out properly?
Absolutely, sir. And just like you were told when you were a young officer, I was told the same thing 17 years ago.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have a question for the police chief. I guess he's MIA. I have a question why the police chief isn't attending council meetings when the single most important issue in our city is the crime problem and also the biggest budget on the city agenda.
Mr. President and Council, my name is David Franklin, I'm the Chief of Staff. In reference to your question, Councilor Sanchez, Chief Medina is currently not available. He's out working and doing what he needs to do for the management of the police department right now.
Isn't this part of his job?
That's questions that you'll have to ask him, sir. If there's other questions for the PD, we'd be more than happy to answer that. That's specific to the questions that we have.
Okay, let me get on with my question. I'll ask you the question then. I have a question in reference to 911. It's my feeling that the 911 calls are being diminished. And based on that, this is the second time I call 911, and the call is diminished through 911 and made a non-call. On Saturday the 26th at 4:08 p.m., I was in my office on Central Avenue and watched a drug dealer point and pistol whip another subject right in front of me and 3 others who were in my office. The offender told the victim, if you do it again, I'm going to shoot you or I'm going to kill you. At that point, I dialed 911, and when I dialed 911, the first thing that happened was I was asked if the victim was still there, which has to be a trained answer, response. I know that the 911 operators train to do things the way they're supposed to do them, and on this date, she asked where the victim was, and I said, there's an individual on the street who has a gun, and you need to come out here and send somebody immediately. The incident took place. It's on tape. The tape is available to anybody that wants to hear it. And as the tape goes on, I actually continued to ask for dispatch and gave a complete description. Since I'm a retired police officer, I was able to do that. And ask why why officers are not coming. And then to that, she responds, "Do you want an officer to come see you?" And I says, "Sure, but you need to come over here and take the gun off the street." I told her to come get the gun off the street several times. I asked her if officers are being dispatched, to which she didn't respond. I asked numerous times, "Are officers being dispatched?" which she did not respond. And at that point, she finally hung up on me. This is the second time this has happened to me. In an area, and every single person that I've talked to about this situation, probably about 12 or 15 in the last week and a half, everybody has a story of how their call to 911 is diminished. So I'm extremely concerned. When I was out on the streets, there was 10 individuals per squad throughout the whole shift. I know we're down officers, but something is taking place, and the individuals, the citizens of Albuquerque, do not feel that they have the confidence to dial 911. And so that needs to be fixed. And what are you doing to fix that situation?
You know, Councilor Sanchez, it's a lot to unpack. What I would ask for the council also, questions like that, if you could give us some advance notice on a question like that, we could bring the appropriate deputy chief or somebody else.
You had the advance notice. I actually talked to, it was Griego and Erica Wilson that actually spoke to me, and they did release the tape to me. So yes, there was advance. That should be talked through up the chain of command in reference to when it affects a city councilor or when it affects anyone. I mean, my issue here is, are there citizens of Albuquerque that are not getting the correct police response because the calls are being diminished? And that was a pure and simple trained response. And I honestly believe that needs to be changed, because the officers need, the citizens of Albuquerque need to have the confidence of being able to dial 911 and get a response. To this day, I was asked if you want to speak to officers. An officer still hasn't come to talk to me.
Thank you. Any other questions for the administration?
couple.
Councilor Lewis and then Councilor Grout.
Mr. President, thank you. Sir, thank you for being here tonight. If the chief had some personal reasons and, for not being here tonight, and certainly no disrespect and hope, no disrespect to him. I mean, if it was a choice, we only meet every other week or so, and certainly regarding this agenda tonight, I would expect that he'd want to be here and certainly want to follow up on some of the questions that we would have, and certainly give input to some of the really dealing with some pretty important bills tonight that I think have to do with your department as well. But it sounds like he sent you. And thank you for being here. I do want to follow up on a question that Councilor Sanchez had a few weeks ago regarding time cards. I'm not going to talk about it regarding or from a standpoint of personnel, but from a standpoint of what we do, and that is a budget that we give you every year. And maybe this is a question for Mr. Rael, and maybe if you don't want to address this, but I think the concern of the council is that we want to know that there's a level of that we want to have a confidence that there's a level of competence, within your department when it comes to those time cards, that someone's not going to walk out the door of your department who makes a $60,000 salary and walk out with $300,000. And I think that's happened twice now. We had an investigation the first time, and then most recently that happened again after we were assured that steps were taken and accountability was in place. And so if this question results in a letter from the chief this week, and I don't think that's the most productive way to deal with these things, but I do think we need to have some public discussion on this. And so what I want to know is how can this council, who gives you millions of dollars every year, know that there's competence at the highest levels of your department, that time cards, and there's not going to be misuse and abuse of time cards to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. And again, if Mr. Rael wants to answer this, again, what are we doing to make sure to assure this council that's giving you millions of dollars in your budget that those dollars are being handled in a competent way?
Sir, one of the things I'm new to the Albuquerque Police Department. I retired from state police in Texas. I've been here since November. I initiated, based on these two cases, for the city payroll to create specialized reports that come to my office. We've started from January through March. So there's some things that we are doing. It's not that there's no accountability. I don't know that we have hundreds of millions of dollars of time fraud. So we are looking into that. There is a process in there. I've implemented that, and I'll defer to the city for others. So it is being looked at, sir.
And Mr. Riley, you want to comment?
Sure, Mr. President and Councilor Lewis and Councilor Sanchez. Just for the record, I think Councilor Sanchez may have received a letter that the chief sent to him on March 26th, or 25th, excuse me, at least explaining the report that was on KRQE related to the issue at hand, and describe what the city was doing at the administrative level at the police department to deal with that issue. But let me just say this, there is a genuine understanding of this issue at the police department and working through it with the commanders to ensure that this does not occur again, that we're minding the store, if you will. But to both of your concerns, I'd be happy to have the chief visit with you and have that conversation on a one-on-one basis. And if it pleases the council at the next council meeting, we'll have the chief available so that you can ask the questions. Again, as we've talked about before, if we get the questions in advance, it's a lot better for us to have more thorough information, such as a copy of the 911 report, or even who was asked to come visit with you all. It really is an opportunity for us to be transparent with you all and to provide you the information. And I realize that some of these issues come up at the last minute, but also, like anyone else that's in public service, a lot of times the chief is in other meetings, et cetera. At the same time, we're having council meetings, and so sometimes it's not an opportune time for him to be here. But be happy to have him available to talk to you all at your request.
Mr. President, Mr. Riley, is it the position of the administration that this command staff is, I think the words were too busy to review time cards?
Mr. President and Councilor Lewis, no, I think it's the position of the administration that we have a lot of priorities that are before us. Obviously, this issue of crime in the community is a very challenging issue and one that does take the full attention of the command staff. However, it's also important to realize and to recognize that the command staff do have administrative responsibilities to ensure that the people that work for them are appropriately, if you will, taking charge of their time and ensuring that that issues like this are addressed. And so we will certainly make sure that we focus on that and ensure that you all have at least the opportunity to ask the chief how he manages the administrative staff at his department.
Councilor Grout.
Mr. President, thank you. I had a couple of questions too for y'all. One of them with time cards. Who's in charge of reviewing those?
So if I may, Mr. President, back to Councilor Lewis, I think that comment that you just made and was repeated was taken out of context. I think when we talked about the chief's staff looking at time cards, was the chief staff normally doesn't look at time cards. This was a one-off issue. So I take exception and say that it's not about the command staff that doesn't want to look at time cards. I think that was taken out of context in that previous, I think it was in the paper, and that's where that quote came from, Chief Medina. Second of all, at the commander and above rank, there are no time cards. And so if I'm a chief of staff and I have a commander under me, they don't technically have what you would say is an overtime because they're exempt. Everybody else has a chain of command that reviews those, and they are reviewed every day. Or not every day, excuse me, every pay period, every week.
Thank you. Is there anybody on the fifth floor that's reviewing any of them?
Excuse me?
Is there anyone on the fifth floor that is reviewing any time cards?
Yeah, so we asked the city through central payroll to create a report, and that is now coming to me as the chief of staff. And we're looking at multiple different avenues to detect fraud. One of my previous jobs in the state police in Texas was in the audit and inspection service within the state police. So we are bringing that style model to the police department, and we've had our first run of that for beginning calendar year January.
Very good. Thank you.